My name is Robert Harrison. I am 54 years old, and I thought I knew my daughter until the night of October 15th, when I heard the conversation that would forever destroy my faith in fatherly love. I had returned early from my business trip to Chicago, arriving at my house on the Upper East Side without calling, hoping to surprise Sarah with her favorite chocolate cake that I had bought at her favorite bakery. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell because we have new stories every single day. Hit the like button and tell us in the comments what city you are visiting us from. What I found when I silently opened the front door was my 26-year-old daughter sitting in my living room on my sofa planning my murder with the coldness of someone organizing a vacation. "I can't take it anymore, Damian," she was saying to her boyfriend while nervously playing with the ring I had given her for her 21st birthday. "He's a disgusting, controlling old man who thinks he owns my life just because he has money." Damian, a 30-year-old guy with the look of a cheap soap opera heartthrob and the morals of a snake, replied with a smile that froze my blood. "My love, we have already talked about this. Your dad has to disappear if we want to be together and be free." My heart stopped. I literally felt as if time froze while I processed those words. My daughter, the girl I had raised alone after her mother died of cancer when she was 8 years old, was discussing how to kill me. "But how do we do it without it looking suspicious?" Sarah asked, her voice as casual as if she were asking what movie to watch. "Look, baby, your dad has heart problems, right? Everyone knows he had that mild attack 2 years ago. A heart attack in the middle of the night wouldn't surprise anyone." Damian got up from the sofa and started walking around the room, like a professor giving a macabre lecture. "We can use digitalis, foxglove. It is a natural plant. If administered in high doses, it perfectly simulates the symptoms of a heart attack. The autopsy would show natural cardiac arrest." "And if it doesn't work?" Sarah asked. "Then we push him down the stairs. Your dad gets up every night at 3 in the morning to drink water, doesn't he? A domestic accident. The old man slips, breaks his neck, problem solved." Sarah laughed a laugh I had known since she was a baby, but now it sounded like the screech of a demon. "You are right. Besides, with the inheritance, we will be able to buy that house in Miami. We saw travel through Europe, and I will be able to open my boutique without asking anyone for permission." From my position, hiding behind the foyer door, I took out my phone silently and started recording. Every word, every laugh, every detail of their homicidal plan was captured in high-quality digital audio. "How much would you inherit exactly?" Damian asked with the interest of an accountant reviewing figures. "Dad is worth approximately $3 million between properties, investments, and the business. Since I am an only child and he hasn't remarried, everything would be mine. $3 million. That was the price my daughter had put on my head. Perfect. With that amount, we can live like kings for the rest of our lives. When do we do it?" "Tomorrow night. Dad returns from Chicago in the afternoon. He will be tired. He will go to bed early. I will prepare his nightly tea with the digitalis, and by midnight we will be free. And if he survives, he isn't going to survive. We will put enough digitalis in there to kill a horse. And if by some miracle he doesn't die from the poison, we help him with the stairs." They had planned to poison me with my nightly tea, a tradition we had maintained for years. Every night since she was 8 years old, Sarah prepared me a cup of chamomile tea, which we drank together while talking about our days. It was our special moment, our father-daughter connection ritual, which I had preserved even when she became an adult. Now she was going to use that sacred ritual to murder me. "Do you have the digitalis?" Sarah asked. Damian took a small vial out of his backpack. "Here it is. I got enough to kill an entire family." "Where did you get it?" "My cousin works in a pharmaceutical lab. I told him it was for a university research project." They had it all planned out. The method, the moment, even the alibi. After my death, Sarah would cry at my funeral. She would receive condolences from friends and family, and then she would go off with Damian to spend my money, while my friends commented on what a tragedy it was to lose Robert so young. "Babe, are you sure you can do it?" Damian asked, taking Sarah's hands in his. "I mean, it is your dad." Sarah looked him directly in the eyes with a coldness I had never seen in her. "Damian, I stopped seeing him as my dad years ago. He is just an obstacle between us and our happiness, an obstacle that has to disappear. You don't feel anything for him, not even a little bit of affection." "Affection?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "Affection for a man who controlled every aspect of my life for 26 years, who never let me have a boyfriend without interrogating him as if he were a criminal, who checks my phone, my bank accounts, my movements. No, Damien, the only thing I feel is hate." Every word was like a dagger in my heart. Had I really been that controlling, that dominant? After her mother's death, I had tried to be father and mother at the same time, protecting her from everything, giving her everything she needed. But apparently my love had been perceived as tyrannical control. "Besides," Sarah continued, "he told me yesterday that he doesn't approve of our relationship, that you're too old for me, that you only want my money. Can you believe it? My money? As if it isn't his money that I will be inheriting. And what did you tell him?" "I told him he was garbage, that I hoped he would die soon so I could be free." You should have seen his face, Damien. He looked as if I had slapped him. Those words, I remembered them perfectly. They had been like poisoned daggers, but I thought they had been spoken in a moment of late adolescent anger. I didn't know they had been a declaration of homicidal intent. "Well, my love, tomorrow night, your wish is going to come true." They kissed passionately on my sofa while finishing planning my murder. It was the most nauseating image of my life, my daughter kissing the man who had convinced her to kill me in the living room where we had spent thousands of nights watching movies together when she was a little girl. I waited until they left. Then I sat in my study for hours listening to the recording over and over again, making sure that every word was audible, that every detail of the plan was documented perfectly. At 6 in the morning, I drove directly to the nearest police precinct. "Good morning, officer. My name is Robert Harrison, and I am here to report a conspiracy to commit homicide. My daughter and her boyfriend are planning to murder me tomorrow night." The officer looked at me with the expression of someone who had heard all kinds of strange complaints, but when I played the recording, his attitude changed completely. 3 hours later, while I was quietly eating breakfast at a cafe near the station, my phone rang. "Dad?" Sarah's voice sounded broken, desperate, completely different from the cold and calculating voice I had heard the night before. "Hello, Sarah." "Dad, why did you do this? Why did you call the police?" My answer was simple, direct, and more devastating than she could have imagined. "Because I prefer having you alive in a cell than dead on my conscience." The silence after my answer lasted exactly 14 seconds. I counted them because in moments of extreme shock, the mind clings to insignificant details to avoid processing the full horror of reality. 14 seconds during which I could hear my daughter processing that her father had preferred to hand her over to justice rather than become her victim. "What do you mean by that?" she finally asked, her voice trembling between confusion and panic. "Sarah, last night I heard every word of your conversation with Damian. I heard you planning my murder with digitalis in my tea. I heard you discussing pushing me down the stairs if the poison didn't work. I heard you calculating the value of my life at $3 million. Dad, we weren't going to... You weren't going to, what? Kill me? I have 47 minutes of conversation recorded where you plan exactly that." The crying started on the other end of the line. It wasn't the manipulative crying that Sarah had perfected over the years to get what she wanted. It was the crying of someone who finally understands that their actions have irreversible consequences. "Dad, please, come get me out of here." "We can talk. I can explain everything to you." "Explain what exactly?" "Explain to me why my daughter, to whom I gave everything, decided that my death was preferable to continuing to share the planet with me. It wasn't my idea. It was Damian who convinced me. He told me that you were never going to let us be happy together, that you were always going to control my life. Ah, so Damian was the one who put the words in your mouth when you told me I was garbage, and that you hoped I would die soon. I I was angry. I didn't mean it. Sarah, when someone plans to buy digitalis to poison their father, they can no longer use anger as an excuse. I heard voices in the background at the precinct, probably other officers explaining the arrest process, the charges she would face, the seriousness of conspiracy to commit homicide. Dad, they say they can give me 15 to 25 years in prison. 25 years. By the time I get out, my life will be over. Your life would have ended anyway if you had gone through with the plan. Because after killing me, how much time do you think would have passed before Damian decided he didn't want to share $3 million with you? The silence again. Sarah had never been dumb. She knew exactly what I meant. Do you think Damian would have... Sarah, a man who convinces a woman to kill her own father is not a man who has moral limits. Once you had become a murderer, you would have been completely dependent on him. And when that dependence became inconvenient, no, Damian loves me. He would never hurt me. The same Damian who is now in the cell next door blaming you for the whole idea. The same one who told the officers that you manipulated him to get the poison. I could hear Sarah choking on her own tears. What? What do you mean? Daughter, your boyfriend betrayed you before they finished reading him his rights. He told the cops that the whole conspiracy was your idea, that you pressured him to get the digitalis, that he was only following your orders because he was afraid of losing you. That is a lie. The police showed me his full statement. According to Damian, you planned everything for months. He was just a victim of your manipulation. The reality of her situation finally hit her completely. Not only had she lost her freedom, but the man for whom she had been willing to commit patricide had abandoned her at the first opportunity. Dad, help me, please. I know I made a terrible mistake, but I am your daughter. I am the only thing you have left of Mom. That line hurt me more than I expected. It was true. Sarah had her mother's eyes, her smile, when it was genuine, even some of her gestures. But it also reminded me of something fundamental. Sarah, your mother died protecting you. She fought against cancer for 2 years, enduring brutal chemotherapy, terrible surgeries, unimaginable pain, just because she didn't want to leave you an orphan. And you were willing to kill me for money. It wasn't just for money. Then why? Because I wanted to be free. Free to make my own decisions to live my life without you constantly judging me. And killing your father was the only way to obtain that freedom. Damian said, yes. He said that, as long as you lived, I would never be truly independent. Sarah, did I ever stop you from studying the major you wanted? No. Did I stop you from getting a job? No. But you always had opinions about. Did I stop you from traveling, having friends, living your life? No, but. Did I stop you from moving into your own apartment when you turned 25? No. You helped me with the down payment. Then explain to me exactly what you wanted to be free from. A long silence. Sarah, the truth is that you wanted to be free from having to earn your own money. You wanted to be free from working, from being responsible, from building a life on your own merit. You wanted $3 million without the effort of earning it. That is not true. No. Then tell me, what was your plan for after killing me and inheriting the money? Damian and I were going to what? Work, contribute to society. Do something productive with your lives. We were going to travel, enjoy ourselves. Be parasites, living off the money I earned working 60 hours a week for 30 years. Dad, you don't have to be so cruel. Cruel, Sarah, you planned to poison my nightly tea. You planned to push me down the stairs if the poison didn't work. You planned to cry at my funeral while collecting my life insurance. But I am cruel for telling the truth. what is going to happen now. Now you are going to learn what it means to face the consequences of your decisions without Dad rescuing you. Aren't you going to help me? Aren't you going to hire lawyers? Sarah, I am going to do something I should have done years ago. I'm going to let you learn to solve your own problems. Are you going to abandon me? No, daughter, I am going to allow you to grow up. After hanging up with Sarah, I sat in the cafe for 3 hours, reliving 26 years of memories that now felt like carefully constructed lies. How had my little girl, my princess, my reason for living after her mother's death, come to plan my murder with the coldness of a professional hitman? Sarah had been born on a rainy dawn in April after 14 hours of labor that almost killed her mother. Karen had insisted on a natural birth, without an epidural, saying she wanted to fully experience the arrival of our daughter. When she was finally born, tiny and wrinkled, but with the most powerful lungs in the hospital, Karen cried with pure happiness. "Robert," she had told me with a voice broken by exhaustion and joy, "this girl is going to change the world." Karen was right, but not in the way we had imagined. The first 8 years were perfect. Sarah was a brilliant, curious, charismatic child. She learned to read at 4 years old. She spoke basic English and French at 6. She played the piano like a little angel at 7. Karen and I were convinced we had raised a genius. But more than smart, Sarah was manipulative from a young age. She had a natural ability to read people, to understand exactly what to say to get what she wanted. With Karen, she was sweet and obedient. With me, she was Daddy's girl who could convince me of anything with a smile. I remember the day she came home from school crying because she had lost her lunch money. Karen wanted to teach her a lesson, making her take a homemade sandwich the next day. But Sarah looked at me with those big eyes and told me, "Dad, if I don't have lunch money, the other kids are going to think we are poor." I gave her $20 extra. Later, we discovered she had lied. She had spent the lunch money on candy and wanted more money to keep buying sweets for her friends. But instead of correcting the behavior, Karen and I laughed about how smart our daughter was. That was our first mistake of many. When Sarah turned 8, Karen started feeling sick. At first, we thought it was work stress, then the seasonal flu. When she finally went to the doctor, the cancer had already metastasized. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. They gave her 6 months to live. Karen lived 2 years fighting the disease, but they were 2 years of constant hospitalizations, brutal chemotherapy, and physical deterioration that was painful to witness. During those 2 years, I tried to be father and mother to Sarah while managing my business and taking care of Karen. Sarah seemed to adapt well to the situation. She was affectionate with her mother. She helped me with basic household chores. She kept good grades in school. But now, reviewing those memories with a new perspective, I realized she had started using Karen's illness as a manipulation tool. Mom told me I need new shoes for the school concert. She would tell me when Karen was too sick to speak. Of course, Karen had never said such a thing, but I wasn't going to interrogate my dying wife about shoes. Mom wants us to eat pizza tonight because she feels better when we are happy. Another lie, but one that made me feel good, believing I could do something to improve Karen's mood. Sarah had learned, at 8 years old, that family crises created opportunities to manipulate situations in her favor. When Karen died, Sarah was 10 years old, and I was completely emotionally destroyed. The girl became my only reason to get up every morning, my only connection to Karen, my only purpose in life, and Sarah knew it. Dad, I am sad because I miss Mom. Can we go to Disneyland, like she always promised we were going to go? How could I say no? Karen had talked for years about taking Sarah to Disneyland when she felt better. Now that she was never going to feel better, it was my responsibility to fulfill that promise. We went to Disneyland, but also to Europe the following year, because Mom wanted Sarah to see the world. Then came the sports car at 16, because Mom would have wanted Sarah to have the best car to be safe. Then came the most expensive private college in the country, because Mom believed in the best education possible. For 16 years after Karen's death, Sarah used her mother's memory as an emotional lever to get everything she wanted, and I, blinded by the pain and guilt of not having been able to save Karen, gave her everything. But it wasn't just materialism. Sarah had also learned to manipulate my emotions to control deeper aspects of my life. Dad, I don't like your girlfriend. I think she is only interested in your money, not like Mom, who loved you for real. I ended 3 serious relationships because Sarah planted doubts about those women's motivations. Now I realize she didn't want to compete for my attention or my money with another woman. Dad, I don't like your business partner. Mom always taught me to trust my instincts about people. I ended lucrative business partnerships because Sarah expressed negative intuitions about my partners. Now I understand she wanted to keep me isolated, dependent solely on her for emotional company. Dad, I think you should work less. Mom always said family was more important than money. I reduced my work hours. I turned down expansion opportunities. I limited my professional growth because Sarah convinced me that is what Karen would have wanted. In reality, she wanted me to be more available to satisfy her constant demands. For 16 years, Sarah had systematically isolated me from romantic relationships, deep friendships, and professional opportunities. She had turned me into a man whose life revolved completely around pleasing his daughter, and now that daughter had decided that my death was preferable to my continued presence in her life. The waiter at the cafe approached for the 4th time to ask me if I needed anything else. I realized I had been sitting there for hours, lost in memories that now felt like evidence in a criminal case against my own naivety. I had raised a sociopath, not intentionally, but I had raised a woman who saw people, even her own father, as tools to get what she wanted. And when a tool was no longer useful, it was discarded. The question that tormented me was, had she always been like this? Or had my mistakes as a father turned her into this? That afternoon, after immersing myself in painful memories that recontextualized my entire relationship with Sarah, I decided I needed to fully understand who Damian Vega was and how he had managed to convince my daughter to commit patricide. I hired a private investigator, Morris Sullivan, a specialist in criminal backgrounds and identity verification. Mr. Harrison, Morris told me when we met in my office, "Are you sure you want to know everything about this man? Sometimes the truth is more disturbing than ignorance. I want to know absolutely everything." The results arrived 2 days later in a 40-page file that made me understand that Sarah had not been Damian Vega's first victim. Damian was 30 years old, but he had lied to Sarah, telling her he was 28. Born in San Diego, he had grown up in a dysfunctional home with an alcoholic father and a mother who worked the streets to support her 5 children. By 15, he already had a record for petty theft. By 18, he had been arrested for credit card fraud. But the most disturbing thing was his pattern of romantic relationships over the last 12 years. Mr. Harrison, Morris explained to me, Damian Vega specializes in what we call long-term romance scams. He identifies young women from wealthy families, particularly those with complicated relationships with their fathers, and manipulates them for months or years to gain access to family money. Has he done this before? At least 4 times that we can document, and all the previous situations ended badly for the women involved. Morris opened the file and showed me photographs and documents that froze my blood. Case number 1, Patricia Miller, 24 years old, daughter of a textile businessman in Boston. Damian had a solid alibi, but Alexandra had started to suspect his true intentions. She had threatened to expose his scam operation. Her death was very convenient for him. Morris showed me the 4th folder, the thickest one. Case number 4, Carol Delgado, 29 years old, only daughter of a rancher in Arizona. This is the situation most similar to your daughter's. Why? Because Damian convinced Carol to kill her father. The words resonated in my head like funeral bells. What happened? Carol poisoned her father's food with rat poison. The man died after 3 days of agony in the hospital. Carol inherited a fortune of $4 million. And then, Damian disappeared with the money 2 months after the funeral. Carol realized she had been manipulated, but it was already too late. When she tried to report the theft, she exposed herself as a murderer. She is currently serving a life sentence for patricide. Did Carol know about the other cases? No. Damian is very careful about keeping his scams separated geographically and chronologically. Each woman believes she is his first true love. I remained silent for several minutes, processing the information. Sarah was not a natural sociopath. She was the victim of an expert predator who had perfected the art of turning daughters into murderers. Morris, how does he select his victims? He has a very specific pattern. He looks for women from wealthy families who have tense relationships with controlling fathers, women who feel trapped by family expectations, who resent paternal authority, who fantasize about financial independence. How does he find them? Social media, mostly. Instagram, Facebook dating sites. He looks for posts that indicate family frustration, complaints about overprotective fathers, photos of luxurious lifestyles funded by parents. Morris showed me screenshots of Sarah's social media over the last 2 years. Post after post complaining about my excessive control, photos of expensive clothes, with sarcastic comments about living with daddy's expectations, memes about toxic parenting. Your daughter basically advertised herself as the ideal victim for someone like Damian. How long was he studying her before making contact? According to our analysis of his online activities, probably 6 months. Damian would subtly comment on her posts, give strategic likes, gradually build familiarity before sending the first direct message. And then he followed the classic romantic manipulation manual. First, he presented himself as the perfect man, handsome, charming, apparently financially independent. Second, he validated all her family frustrations, making her feel understood for the first time. Third, he gradually planted the idea her father was the only obstacle to her happiness. How long does this process take? Generally between 8 months and 2 years. Damian is patient because the rewards are huge. Morris showed me the analysis of text messages between Sarah and Damian that the police had recovered from their phones. The progression was chilling. Your dad sounds very controlling. You must feel frustrated. You deserve to be free to make your own decisions. Your dad is never going to change. Men like him can't let go of control. As long as he lives, you are never going to become truly independent. If we really loved each other, we would find a way to be together without interference. Your dad has to understand that he can no longer control you, one way or another. Have you ever thought about what your life would be like if he wasn't around? Is there a way to reverse this type of manipulation? It is extremely difficult. Once the victim has been convinced that murder is justified, their psychology has been fundamentally altered. It requires years of intensive therapy, and even then the damage could be permanent. What do you recommend I do? Mr. Harrison, your daughter needs to understand that she was a victim of manipulation, but she must also face the consequences of her decisions. Forgiveness without responsibility would only make her more vulnerable to future manipulation. And Damian is going to try to manipulate the legal system just like he manipulated your daughter. He is going to paint himself as a victim. He is going to blame Sarah. For everything he is going to look for deals with prosecutors. Don't expect him to take responsibilities for anything. That night, with all this information, I understood that my daughter had been both victim and perpetrator. She had been manipulated by an expert, but she had also made active choices that turned her into a conspirator for murder. The question that tormented me now was, could I save her from Damian without saving her from the consequences of her own decisions? A week after the arrest, Sarah asked me for a visit at the prison. I agreed not because I had forgiven her betrayal, but because I needed to understand how my fatherly love had transformed into her homicidal hatred. I needed to know if there was anything left of my real daughter under the layers of manipulation that Damian had built in her mind. The visiting room of the State Women's Correctional Facilities was exactly what I expected. Gray walls, metal tables bolted to the floor, guards watching every movement, but nothing had prepared me to see Sarah in a prison uniform, without makeup, with her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, looking for the first time in years like the girl she had been. Dad, she said to me when I sat down in front of her, "Thank you for coming." "Sarah, I know you are angry with me. I know I have to explain many things to you. I am not here for you to explain to me. I am here for you to tell me the truth. What truth do you want? I want you to tell me when you started hating me. I want you to tell me what I did to deserve you planning to poison my nightly tea." Sarah lowered her gaze, playing nervously with her hands, as she had done since she was a child, when she was about to confess something difficult. "Dad, I never hated you. Sarah, you planned my murder for months. You told me I was garbage and that you hoped I would die soon. That is not love. I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid of never being able to live my own life. Afraid of becoming a 40-year-old woman who still needs her dad's permission to make decisions." Her words hurt me because they had elements of truth. "Did I stop you from living your own life? Not directly, but what? But you always had opinions about everything. About my clothes, my friends, my job, my boyfriends. I always felt like I had to justify my decisions to you. Sarah, those were conversations. I never forbade you anything. You didn't have to forbid it. Your disapproval was enough to make me feel guilty for wanting things that you didn't approve of. I remained silent, considering if I had really been as controlling as she perceived. Give me specific examples. When I wanted to study art instead of business administration, you told me that art didn't pay the bills, that I needed a practical career. I told you that you could study art if that made you happy, but that you also had to have a realistic financial plan. See, even now you keep justifying your control. You gave me permission to study art, but with conditions that made me feel irresponsible for wanting it. She had a point. I had framed my advice as support, but perhaps it had been perceived as emotional manipulation. What else? When I went out with guys in college, you interrogated them as if they were criminals. What family do you come from? What are you studying? What are your professional plans? You scared them all away. I was protecting your future. You were controlling my present. No 20-year-old guy wants to be interrogated by his girlfriend's dad, as if he were applying for a job. And how did we go from that to planning my murder?" Sarah remained silent for a long moment, clearly struggling with how to articulate something complex. "I met Damian a year and a half ago. At first, it was refreshing to be with someone who didn't judge me, who didn't question my decisions, who made me feel that my feelings were valid." "What feelings?" "Resentment toward you, frustration for feeling like I could never be truly independent while you were alive. And Damian validated those feelings. More than validating them, he amplified them. He made me see that my frustrations were not irrational, that your behavior really was toxic, that I deserved better." "When did he start talking about killing me?" "He didn't start talking about murder. He started talking about freedom. He told me that as long as you lived, I would never be truly free, because I would always be seeking your approval or rebelling against your disapproval. And then he started proposing hypothetical scenarios. Would you feel bad if your dad died? Do you think you would cry at his funeral? Or would you feel relieved? Have you ever thought about what your life would be like without him?" It was exactly the pattern Morris had identified in Damian's previous cases. "When did you go from the hypothetical to the practical?" 3 months ago. Damian told me that he had investigated and that you had heart problems. He told me that you probably wouldn't live more than 10 years anyway, and that during those 10 years, I would waste the best years of my life under your control. And that justified accelerating my death. Damian presented it as an act of mercy. He said that you would probably suffer for years with health problems, that it would be better for everyone if your death was quick and painless. Did you really believe that? Sarah began to cry. Dad, when you are with someone who tells you every day that you are right to feel frustrated, that you deserve better, that your dad is the problem. After months of that, you start to believe that anything that frees you from that situation is justified. But you never doubted, you never thought that killing your own father was extreme. I doubted many times, but every time I doubted, Damian reminded me of all the ways you had damaged my life. He reminded me how you had prevented me from being independent, how you had made me feel guilty for wanting freedom. Sarah, did you ever consider simply walking away from me? If you really saw me as so toxic, why didn't you simply cut contact? Because I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid of not being able to survive financially without you. Afraid that you would disinherit me if I rebelled openly. Afraid that you would be capable of ruining my professional life using your contacts. So the murder was about money. It wasn't just about money, it was about power. Damian made me see that as long as you had economic power over me, I could never be truly free, that the only way to free myself completely was to eliminate that power. And killing the father who loved you for 26 years was the only way to get that liberation. Sarah looked directly at me for the first time during our conversation, and for a moment I saw my real daughter, not the woman who had been manipulated by Damian. Dad, I know you can't forgive me. I know what I planned was monstrous. But I need you to understand that when you are under the influence of someone like Damian, your perception of reality gets completely distorted. Are you saying that you are not responsible for your decisions? No, I am responsible. But I was also a victim of systematic manipulation for a year and a half. And what do you feel now? Horror. Horror for having gone this far. Horror for having been willing to hurt you in the most terrible way possible. Horror for having lost my dad because of my own stupidity. For the first time since her arrest, Sarah's words sounded genuinely remorseful. Do you really feel remorse? Or is this just another manipulation? Dad, for a week, I have been in a cell without Damian whispering in my ear, without external influence, just with my own thoughts, and I realized that I planned to kill the only man who has truly loved me in my life. And does that change anything? It does not change what I did, but I hope it changes what I do next. 2 weeks after my visit to the prison, the prosecutor on the case district attorney, Anthony Ramsey, summoned me to his office to discuss the details of the legal process against Sarah and Damian. He was a man of about 50 years old, with the serious expression of someone who had prosecuted hundreds of family crime cases and was no longer surprised by the cruelest betrayals. Mr. Harris, he told me while organizing a mountain of documents on his desk, I rarely see cases with evidence this solid and so emotionally devastating. Your recording is frankly one of the most detailed confessions of conspiracy to commit murder we have ever had. How solid is the case? Very solid. 47 minutes of high-quality audio where the defendants discuss the method of murder, the precise moment, alibis, and financial motivations. We have the digitalis they bought. We have text messages planning the crime. And we have testimonies from vendors confirming the purchases of the poison. The prosecutors showed me complete transcripts of the recording, organized by topics. Murder method, financial plans, after the homicide alibis, motivations. Reading my daughter's words in a legal format categorized as criminal evidence was more painful than listening to the original recording. What sentences do they face? If they are convicted on all charges, Sarah could receive between 15 and 25 years in prison. Damian, with his criminal record, and as the primary instigator, could receive between 25 years and life imprisonment. 25 years. Sarah would be 51 years old when she got out of prison, if she ever got out. Her entire adult life, her youth, would have evaporated because of a decision she made under manipulation. Is there a possibility of a plea bargain? It depends on how willing they are to cooperate. Damian is insisting that the entire conspiracy was Sarah's idea, that he was manipulated and coerced. Sarah, on the other hand, is taking partial responsibility, but arguing psychological manipulation. Which version do you believe? Honestly, based on the pattern of Damian's previous behavior that your private investigator documented, I believe he was the master architect. But legally, both consciously participated in planning a murder. The prosecutor showed me a comparative analysis his office had prepared, comparing Sarah's case with Damian's previous cases. Look at these patterns, Mr. Harris. With Patricia Miller, Damian convinced her to steal gradually larger amounts over 6 months. With Andrea Sanders, he started with minor forgery and escalated to major fraud. With Carmen Delgado, he started with emotional blackmail and escalated to murder. What is your point? My point is that Damian perfects his methods with each victim. Your daughter was not his first attempt to create a killer. She was his most sophisticated masterpiece. He showed me psychological analyses they had ordered for both defendants. The psychological profiles are fascinating. Damian shows classic signs of sociopathy: lack of empathy, calculated manipulation, absence of genuine remorse. Sarah shows signs of having been a victim of prolonged psychological manipulation, but she also shows a capacity for remorse and recognition of responsibility. Does that help her case? It could, if Sarah is willing to testify fully against Damian, if she can demonstrate the pattern of manipulation she suffered, if she shows genuine remorse and commitment to rehabilitation, we might consider a reduced sentence. How reduced? Possibly 10 to 12 years instead of 15 to 25. 10 years was still a decade of my daughter's life, but it could also save her from becoming a middle-aged woman destroyed by the prison system. What do you need from me? Your testimony is going to be crucial. As the victim, your perspective on the emotional impact of the crime on the relationship you had with Sarah, on the behavioral changes you noticed during her relationship with Damian. And if I testify, does it help Sarah receive a lighter sentence? It is possible, but I also need to ask you something difficult. Do you want Sarah to receive the minimum sentence, or do you want her to receive the sentence she deserves? The question hit me like a punch. As a father, I wanted to protect my daughter even after she had planned to kill me. As a citizen, I knew that attempting to murder your own father required severe consequences. I don't know, I admitted. It is understandable. Many victims of family crime struggle with that conflict. They love the perpetrator, but they also want justice. The prosecutor showed me statistics on family crime that chilled my blood. Mr. Harris, approximately 30% of planned parricide cases result in a successful murder. Your decision to turn in the recording literally saved your life. What happens to families after cases like this? Honestly, most never reconcile. The betrayal is too deep, the trust too destroyed. Some parents visit their children in prison occasionally, but very few rebuild meaningful relationships. And those who do reconcile it generally requires the perpetrator to take full responsibility, demonstrate genuine remorse for years, and participate in intensive rehabilitation. Even then, the relationship never goes back to what it was. I left the prosecutor's office with a clear understanding that my life had changed permanently. Regardless of the trial's outcome, regardless of whether Sarah received 10 years or 25, I no longer had a daughter in the traditional sense. I had a stranger who shared my DNA and who had been willing to kill me for money. That night, sitting in my study surrounded by photographs of Sarah from happier years, I made the hardest decision of my life. I was going to testify honestly about everything that had happened, without trying to minimize my daughter's crimes or maximize her punishment. I was going to let justice take its course without emotional interference on my part, because although I still loved the little girl Sarah had been, I could no longer protect the woman she had become. 1 week before the trial, I received an unexpected visit. that would completely change my understanding of the entire family situation. My sister-in-law, Helen Karen's sister, showed up at my door at 9 at night with an expression I had not seen in the 16 years since her sister's death. "Robert, we need to talk about Sarah," she told me without preamble. "There are things about Karen and about our family that I never told you, but that might explain why your daughter reached this extreme." Helen had been an oncology nurse at the hospital where Karen received treatment, and after the funeral we had maintained occasional contact, mainly because Sarah enjoyed having an aunt in her life. But Helen had always been reserved about Karen's past, and I had never pressed for details. "What kind of things?" Robert Karen had an older brother who died when she was 12 years old. His name was David, and he died under very specific circumstances that our family never discussed openly. She sat in my living room, the same place where I had heard Sarah planning my murder, and pulled out an old folder full of yellowing medical documents. "David died of poisoning. Karen killed him." The words floated in the air like toxic smoke. "What are you saying?" "Karen poisoned David with plants from our house's garden, from foxglove specifically, which contains digitalis." Digitalis. The same poison Sarah had planned to use to kill me. "Helen, that is impossible. Karen was the gentlest person I ever knew." "Karen was 12 years old when she did it, Robert. She was a child with serious psychological problems that our family decided to hide instead of treating." Helen showed me letters Karen had written to her during her college years, letters where she mentioned nightmares about David and fears about having children. Robert Karen was terrified that if she had children, they might inherit her violent tendencies. But Sarah showed no signs of violence during her childhood. "No, but Karen confided something to me just before dying that I never told you." "What?" "That she had been watching Sarah very carefully for years, looking for signs of the same impulses she had, and that she had noticed things." "What kind of things?" Helen pulled a diary from her folder, a small notebook with Karen's handwriting. Karen kept a secret diary about Sarah's behavior. "Read this." I opened the diary to the page Helen pointed out. "Sarah, 6 years old. I found her hamster dead in its cage this morning. Sarah said it died on its own, but there were signs that it had been squeezed. When I asked her directly, she put on that same blank expression I used to have when my parents asked me about David. Sarah, 7 years old. I found her putting salt in the fish tank today. When I confronted her, she said she wanted to see what would happen. The fish died overnight. She showed no remorse, only curiosity about the process of death. Sarah, 8 years old. Robert's business partner's dog disappeared during our barbecue. I found the dog dead in our garden shed the next day. Sarah said she did not know how it got there, but she was the only child who had access to the shed. Sarah, 9 years old. She asked me very specific questions about how I would feel if Robert died. When I asked her why, she said she was curious about death and grief. The questions were too sophisticated for a 9-year-old girl. Each entry was more disturbing than the last. Karen had been documenting signs of sociopathy in Sarah for years. "Helen, why did Karen never tell me any of this?" "Because she had hope that Sarah could be different, that with enough love and attention she would not develop the same impulses Karen had fought. But it got worse." Helen showed me the last entries of the diary written shortly before Karen died. "Sarah, 10 years old. She has been asking detailed questions about my cancer treatment, about what medications I am taking, about how much pain I am in. Yesterday she offered to help me feel better by bringing me extra medicine. I am afraid." Sarah, 10 years old. Robert is so devastated by grief that he does not see what I see. Sarah is not mourning my impending death. She is planning it. She has already talked about rearranging her room, about things she wants to do when Mom is no longer sick. Sarah, 10 years old. Final entry. I think Sarah is going to try to accelerate my death. She has been researching my medications online, asking the nurses questions about dosages. I am too weak to protect Robert from what she might become. God help him. Helen, are you telling me that Sarah might have killed Karen? I cannot prove it, but Karen died faster than the doctors expected, and some of her medicines had been altered. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because Sarah was a 10-year-old girl, because I had no solid evidence, and because I thought that with therapy and love she could be saved. Do you think Sarah is like Karen? I think Sarah inherited more than Karen's eyes and smile. I think she inherited her capacity for violence when she feels trapped or threatened. Helen put away all the documents and looked at me directly. Robert, what you discovered about Sarah planning to kill you was not an aberration caused by Damian's manipulation. It was the culmination of 26 years of suppressed violent impulses finally finding expression. So Sarah is a natural sociopath. I think Sarah learned to suppress her violent tendencies for years, but Damian gave her permission to act on impulses she had felt her entire life. That revelation changed everything about how I understood the situation. Sarah was not just a victim of manipulation. She was a person with a genetic predisposition toward violence, who had found the perfect excuse to act on her darkest impulses. The day of the trial, I arrived at the courthouse with a completely new understanding of who my daughter really was. Helen's revelations about Karen and the secret diary had shown me that the conspiracy to kill me had not been an aberration caused by external manipulation, but the inevitable expression of violent impulses Sarah had been suppressing for decades. The courtroom was full of curious onlookers, journalists, and some friends who came to support me. Sarah entered in handcuffs, dressed in a simple suit that Helen had bought for her, looking younger and more vulnerable than she actually was. Damian arrived separately, also handcuffed, but with an arrogance that contrasted notably with my daughter's apparent contrition. District Attorney Anthony Ramsey began his case with the recording I had made that fatal night. Listening to the voices of Sarah and Damian planning my murder, again this time amplified by the courtroom speakers, was more shocking than the first time. The jurors took notes frantically, some shaking their heads in disgust. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Ramsey said, "rarely do we see conspiracy to commit murder documented so explicitly. The defendants not only planned to kill Mr. Harris, they discussed methods, precise timing, alibis, and how to spend his inheritance after his death. Sarah's defense, led by attorney Mary Towers, had decided to base her strategy on psychological manipulation and undue influence. My client was the victim of an expert predator who had perfected the art of turning loving daughters into weapons against their parents. Damian's defense, led by attorney Charles Miller, argued the opposite. Damian Vega was seduced and manipulated by a woman obsessed with inheriting her father's fortune, a woman who used her sexuality and emotional manipulation to convince my client to participate in her homicidal plan. During the first 3 days of the trial, we heard testimonies from experts in manipulation psychologists who had evaluated both defendants and survivors of Damian's previous victims. Patricia Miller, Damian's first known victim, testified about his pattern of gradual seduction and financial manipulation. Damian does not appear overnight as a manipulator, Patricia testified. He spends months making you feel understood, validated, special. By the time he suggested stealing money from my father, I was so emotionally dependent on his approval that any suggestion seemed reasonable. But the most impactful testimony came from the sister of Carmen Delgado, who had flown in from Sonora, specifically to testify about what had happened to her sister. Carmen killed our father because Damian convinced her it was her only path to freedom. After my father died and Carmen inherited his fortune, Damian disappeared with the money. Carmen realized she had been manipulated, but it was already too late. She is serving a life sentence for parricide, while Damian moved on to his next victim. When it was my turn to testify, the prosecutor guided me through my relationship with Sarah, the changes I had noticed during her relationship with Damian, and the devastating impact of discovering her betrayal. Mr. Harris Ramsey asked me, "When did you first suspect that your daughter might be capable of violence against you?" "Never," I answered honestly. "Even when I discovered her plan, my first instinct was to protect her, not prosecute her." "What changed your mind?" "I realized that if she did not face consequences for her actions, she would remain vulnerable to future manipulation. And I also realized that other families might be at risk if Damian was not stopped." During cross-examination, Sarah's defense attorney tried to paint me as a controlling and emotionally abusive father. "Mr. Harris, isn't it true that you controlled every aspect of your daughter's life?" "I tried to guide her decisions because I loved her and wanted her to succeed." "But didn't your guidance feel more like control to a young woman who wanted independence?" "Possibly, but parental guidance does not justify planning murder." "Don't you consider that your daughter might have felt trapped by your expectations?" "If she felt trapped, she had options. She could move out. She could cut contact. She could seek therapy. She did not need to kill me to gain freedom." The most dramatic moment of the trial came when Sarah herself took the witness stand. She had decided to testify against Damian in exchange for a potentially reduced sentence. "Ms. Harris," asked her lawyer, "please tell the jury how you met Damian Vega." "I met him through social media," Sarah said quietly. "He seemed interested in my life, in my feelings, in ways I had not experienced before." "How did he gradually influence your thoughts about your father?" "At first he would only listen when I complained about feeling controlled, but gradually he began to suggest that my father's behavior was not normal, that I deserved better treatment." "When did the conversations turn toward violence?" "It happened so gradually I barely noticed. First he would say things like, 'Your father is not going to change until something drastic happens.' Then he began to ask hypothetical questions like, 'What would your life be like if he were not around?' "When did you realize he was serious about killing your father?" "When he showed me the digitalis. It was then that I understood we were no longer talking hypothetically." "But you did not stop him." Sarah broke down in tears. "No. By then I had been so convinced that my father was the problem in my life that murder seemed justified." During cross-examination by Damian's lawyer, Sarah was forced to admit her own responsibility. "Ms. Harris, isn't it true that you actively participated in planning your father's death?" "Yes." "Did you research poisoning methods?" "Yes." "Did you discuss how to dispose of your father's body?" "Yes." "And did you calculate exactly how much money you would inherit?" "Yes." "So you were not just a victim of manipulation, you were a willing conspirator." Sarah looked directly at me for the first time during the whole trial. "Yes," she whispered, "I was a willing conspirator." That admission sealed the fate of both of them. On the last day of the trial, just before the jury retired to deliberate, something occurred that no one had anticipated. Damian asked for permission to make a final statement, without the presence of his lawyers. The judge, intrigued by the unusual request, agreed, after confirming that Damian understood that anything he said could be used against him. "Your Honor," Damian began with a calmness that was more disturbing than if he had been nervous, "there are aspects of this case that the jury needs to know before reaching their verdict." His lawyer tried to intervene, but Damian silenced him with a gesture. Everything you have heard about my manipulation of Sarah Harris is true, but there is a part of the story that even Sarah does not know." The courtroom went completely silent. Even the journalists stopped taking notes, sensing that something significant was about to be revealed. I did not meet Sarah by chance on social media. I had been watching her family for almost 3 years before making contact. My heart rate spiked. 3 years. That meant he had been stalking Sarah since she was 23. "Why were you watching her family?" asked the prosecutor. "Because Robert Harris killed my father." The courtroom erupted in chaos. The judge had to bang his gavel repeatedly to restore order. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. "That is impossible," I managed to say. "I don't even know who your father was." "My father was Michael Vega." He worked as a construction foreman on one of your projects in 2018. Michael Vega. The name hit me like a lightning bolt. I remembered him perfectly. A 40-year-old man who had been crushed by a beam that fell due to improper installation at the project site. It had been declared an accident, but his family had tried to sue my company. Your negligence killed my father, Damian continued. Inadequate safety measures cutting costs to save money, putting workers at risk to maximize profits. My father died because you valued money more than human life. That was investigated thoroughly, I said. It was declared accidental? Yes, because you had enough money to hire lawyers who could make accidents look inevitable. But I knew the truth. The prosecutor stood up. Your Honor, these allegations are not relevant to the case at hand. On the contrary, Damian replied, they are completely relevant because they explain why I chose this family specifically. He continued, after my father died and his family's lawsuit failed, I decided that Robert Harris needed to pay for what he had done. But I also realized that simply killing him would not be enough. I wanted him to experience the same betrayal and pain he had caused my family. So you manipulated his daughter into planning his murder. I spent almost 3 years studying this family, learning their dynamics, identifying vulnerabilities. Sarah's resentment toward her controlling father made her the perfect weapon. I looked at Sarah, who seemed equally shocked by these revelations. She had thought her relationship with Damian was about love. Instead, it had been an elaborate revenge plan. But something unexpected happened during those months of manipulation. Damian continued, I actually started to care about Sarah. She was supposed to be nothing more than a tool for my revenge, but she became important to me. Important enough to save her from committing murder? Asked the prosecutor. No, important enough to want to spend her inheritance together after she killed her father. The cold calculation in his words sent chills through the entire courtroom. Then when I realized Robert had discovered her plan, I knew my revenge had failed, but I also realized I could still hurt him in a different way. How? By ensuring that Sarah received the maximum sentence, destroying any possibility of reconciliation between father and daughter. Ensuring that Robert spent the rest of his life knowing he had sent his only daughter to prison. He looked directly at me with a smile that was pure malice. My father died alone and forgotten. Now you will live alone and childless. Perfect symmetry. The impact of his words was devastating. Everything had been an elaborate revenge scheme from the start. Sarah had not only been manipulated to plan my murder, she had been used as a weapon in a vendetta dating back 5 years. But there is one more thing, Damian continued, something that even my extensive research did not uncover until recently. What? Sarah's mother, Karen, also had blood on her hands. I found out about her brother David last week when a private investigator I hired uncovered hospital records from the 1970s. Helen gasped from where she was sitting in the gallery. Somehow Damian had managed to discover the family secret that had been hidden for decades. Karen Harris murdered her own brother when she was 12 years old. Sarah did not just inherit her mother's eyes. She inherited her capacity to kill family members. He paused for maximum impact, which means that regardless of my manipulation, Sarah eventually would have tried to kill someone in her family. I only gave her permission to act on impulses she had felt her entire life. Sarah's defense attorney looked devastated. This revelation potentially destroyed her entire case, based on manipulation and reduced responsibility. Are you saying Sarah would have planned murder, even without your influence? Asked the judge. I'm saying that when I met Sarah Harris, I found a woman who was already fantasizing about her father's death. I did not create those fantasies, I only encouraged them. He looked at Sarah with something that might have been genuine regret. I'm sorry, my love, you were supposed to be my weapon, but you became my weakness, and now we will both pay the price. As the guards took Damian back to his seat, the entire courtroom remained stunned by the implications of his confession. The jury would now have to consider not only premeditated murder, but also genetic predisposition toward violence, elaborate revenge schemes, and family secrets spanning generations. My daughter had not only been manipulated to plan my death, she had been recruited specifically because she had inherited a family legacy of sibling murder. The truth was infinitely more complex and disturbing than any of us had imagined. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they finally returned with their verdict, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. I sat in the front row directly behind the prosecutors, studying my daughter's face while waiting to learn her fate. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" asked the judge. "Yes, Your Honor." "In the case of the state versus Sarah Harris on the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, how does the jury find guilty, Your Honor?" Sarah's shoulders slumped, but she did not cry. She had been expecting this outcome after Damian's devastating testimony. And in the case of the state versus Damian Vega on the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, how does the jury find guilty, Your Honor? On the additional charge of solicitation of murder, how does the jury find also guilty, Your Honor? The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later, giving both defendants time to prepare mitigation statements and character witnesses. During those 2 weeks, I had to decide what kind of statement I would make during the sentencing hearing. As a victim, I had the right to address the court about the impact the crime had on my life and what sentence I believed was appropriate. Helen visited me during that time, bringing more information about our family's dark history. "Robert," she told me, "after Damian's testimony, I did more research on our family tree. The violence does not start with Karen. She showed me genealogical records dating back to the 1800s. There has been a pattern of family violence in our lineage for generations. Brothers killing brothers, daughters poisoning mothers, sons murdering fathers. It is as if there were a genetic predisposition toward violence against family members during times of stress. What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting that Sarah might not be fully responsible for her impulses, but she is responsible for her decisions. Knowing about genetic predisposition does not excuse acting on it." On the day of the sentencing, both defendants had opportunities to make statements before the judge pronounced their sentences. Damian went first. "Your Honor, I accept full responsibility for my actions, but I want the court to understand that my motivation was not greed, it was justice. Robert Harris's negligence killed my father, and the legal system failed to hold him accountable. I took justice into my own hands. However, I recognized that my methods were wrong. I involved an innocent young woman in my quest for revenge, and for that I am truly sorry." His statement felt rehearsed, calculated to generate sympathy without admitting real regret. When it was Sarah's turn, she stood up slowly and faced the judge directly. "Your Honor, I have no excuse for what I plan to do to my father. Yes, I was manipulated by Damian Vega. Yes, I may have inherited violent tendencies from my mother's family, but in the end, I chose to participate in planning a murder." Her voice was steady, clear, without the manipulation I had become accustomed to for years. "I spent 26 years receiving love support, education, and opportunities from my father. In return, I planned to poison his nightly tea and push him down the stairs if the poison did not work. No amount of manipulation can excuse that betrayal." She turned to look at me directly. "Dad, I do not expect your forgiveness because I cannot forgive myself. But I want you to know that during these months in jail, I have finally understood what love really means. It means protecting someone even when they have betrayed you. It means calling the police when you discover your daughter is planning murder. It means saving someone's life even when it costs them their freedom." Tears were running down her face now. "You showed me more love in that decision to turn me in than I showed you during 26 years of lies and manipulation. And I will spend every day of my sentence trying to become the daughter who deserved that love." For the first time since this nightmare began, Sarah sounded like my real daughter, instead of the stranger who had been living in my house. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and addressed both the judge and my daughter. Your Honor, during these months I have learned things about my family that I never knew about genetic predisposition toward violence, about manipulation techniques, about revenge plots spanning years. But in the end, this case is about decisions. I looked at Damian. Damian Vega chose revenge over justice manipulation, over honesty destruction over healing. His father's death was tragic, but instead of working through appropriate legal channels or seeking therapy for his grief, he chose to destroy another family. Then I looked at Sarah. My daughter chose to participate in planning my murder. Yes, she was manipulated, but countless other young women have been manipulated without resorting to parricide. She chose betrayal over communication violence, over independence murder, over difficult conversations. I paused, gathering strength for what I needed to say next. However, I also need to acknowledge my own decisions. I chose protection over preparation, leniency over discipline, control over trust. I raised a daughter who felt that murder was her only path to freedom, and I must accept partial responsibility for that. But today I choose forgiveness over revenge, understanding over anger, hope over despair. I hope my daughter uses her time in prison to become the person she was meant to be, before manipulation and family dysfunction distorted her character. As for the sentence, Your Honor, I believe justice requires consequences proportional to both the crime and the potential for rehabilitation. Damian Vega has shown no real remorse and represents a continued danger to other families. He deserves the maximum sentence. My daughter, however, has shown genuine remorse and recognition of responsibility. With appropriate therapy and rehabilitation, she could still become a productive member of society. I support a sentence that reflects both the seriousness of her crime and the possibility of redemption. The judge took a brief recess before announcing the sentences. When the court resumed, he addressed both defendants. Damian Vega has been convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and solicitation of murder. His manipulation of Sarah Harris was calculated sustained for years and part of a broader pattern of victimizing families for personal revenge. He is sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Damian showed no emotion. Sarah Harris has been convicted of conspiracy to commit murder against her own father, although I recognize the manipulation she suffered and her apparent genuine remorse. The crime she planned was heinous and required sustained intent for months. However, given her cooperation with the prosecutor's office, her apparent genuine remorse and expert testimony regarding her vulnerability to manipulation, she is sentenced to 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. 15 years! My daughter would be 41 years old when she was eligible for parole. As the guards took both defendants away, Sarah looked at me one last time. I love you, Dad, she mouthed silently. I love you too, I mouthed back. And for the first time in months, I really meant it. Justice had been served, but more importantly, perhaps redemption was still possible.